Hey, good morning, everyone. Welcome to Think About It Thursday. Thank you for joining us today. Got a couple scriptures and a story to share with you. Colossians chapter 3, verse 1 says, "Since then you were raised with Christ, seek those things which are above where Christ is seated at the right hand of God. Set your mind on the things above, not on the things of earth." So positioned now in God's economy, born again believers are sitting with Christ in the heavenly places. Now, I want to bring that out because it's going to be important later on in our talk. You died and your life is hidden with Christ in God. When Christ, who is our life, appears, then you will appear with him in glory. So we've died to our old self. We've been risen to new life in Jesus Christ. And then he goes on to saying things like, put to death those things that are in you, and things like earthly things. It says like fornication, uncleanliness, passions, evil desire, things like this. And then verse 8 says, "But now you yourselves are to put off these." In other words, you yourself are to get rid of these things, put away these things. And he lists things like anger and wrath and malice, blasphemy, filthy language, not lying to each other. And then he says, put off the old man. And then he says, put on the new man, which is being renewed in the knowledge according to the image of him who created him. So we're called to put off the old, put on the new, get rid of something, but then do something. And then he goes on, he says, therefore, as the elect of God, so who we are in Christ, holy and beloved, put on. So it's not just putting off something, but he says put on mercy, tender mercies, kindness, humility, meekness, long-suffering, bearing with one another, forgiving one another, putting on the bond of love, things like that. And then over in Hebrews chapter 12, it says, since we are surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses, let us lay aside or get rid of every weight and the sin which so easily entangles us and ensnares us, and let us run with endurance the race before us, looking unto Jesus, the author and the finisher of our faith. So this idea of being new creations in Christ, putting off things that can entangle us, that can trip us off, that can lead us in. Maybe it's not sin itself, but it is a temptation that we allow in our life that leads us into sin, any of those things. Now, Peggy and I live here in Mariposa County, and we don't live in a remote area, but we do live in a rural area. And we're surrounded by, we have a creek right next to us, we're surrounded by forest. And interesting enough, yesterday, I was studying, reading a book in our living room, and Peggy was doing some work in the kitchen, painting. And I came out, and when I came out, right behind us here, I noticed a bear. It wasn't a cub, but it was a young bear. A bear leaving our yard and running over the rock here where we live. And I told Peggy, wow, there's a bear. There's a bear. And I left and came back in the house. And later on, Peggy was calling me and said, the bear's back. And sure enough, the bear was there and wanting to come into our yard. And in fact, unbeknownst to Peggy and I, while I was inside studying and reading and she was in the kitchen painting, the bear had been in our yard. Now, why? Well, Peggy has bird feeders all over, and it's wonderful. We have so many beautiful birds that come here. She had cages that hold this stuff called suet, and bird feed, and bird feeders hanging with seeds in them, and get all these lovely birds coming. But what happened was it attracted the bear. And so what did we do? Well, immediately, right then, Peggy started taking down the bird feeders and removing them, because that is what the bear was trying to get in to feed on. And when we look at things in the natural, sometimes we can look at things in the spiritual, right? And I think the challenge for us is, what are those feeders that are hanging in our lives, in our soul, that the bear, whether it's the flesh, the enemy, wants to come in and try to feed on, right? In of themselves, it may not even be a sin issue, but it's something that leads us into sin. Or it could actually be sin. Perhaps it's a habit that God is saying, this is a feeder, and just like the bird feeder hanging in Eric and Peggy's yard, this is the thing that attracts sin into your life, and this is the thing that causes you to stumble, and you have to remove it, and not only remove it, but replace it with things of the Lord. And so again, we can't do this necessarily all on our own at all, but we can cooperate with the Spirit of God in us. And so, for all of us, it's going to look different. You know, these feeders that are hanging in your life might look different. Again, it could be a habit that's wrong. It could be a mindset. It could be something that you're continuing to do. I know for me personally, I'll just be very transparent. One of the things I have to let go of is speaking about past hurts that lead me then to just kind of dwelling on them and becoming bitter. That's a feeder that's hanging there. And instead, I need to replace it with gratitude, with mercy, with sympathy. There's an example of that. So I thought it was interesting, you know, God's calling us to let go of things that entangle us, to put off old things, and just like that bear that came in here yesterday, we immediately had to remove the source of the food that it was feeding on. And you can't wait. You can't take a lot of time if you know it's there, or ask God to show you. Now, what are we going to do with the birds? Not quite sure. Maybe we can get rid of how we were feeding them and replace it with another way. But for now, the feeders are put away, and we hope the bear stays away and stays down by the creek. Well, God bless you today.